A trial doesn't conclude when the prosecution rests, yet in the recent case of the Minecraft YouTuber Dream, virtually every commentator has merely accepted that the evidence released by the speedrun moderators conclusively establishes his guilt. Dream has been convicted in the court of public opinion. But our position is, everyone deserves a proper defense. Now, we're not claiming to be the best equipped to mount such a defense, we are somewhat reluctant, but are attempting to perform the task for the simple reason that no one else is. Except, of course, Dream himself. His interest in mounting a proper defense is obvious, but we don't feel that an accused person should be required to assume the entire burden for constructing his or her defense. In this video, then, we will try to produce a brief for Dream's defense. We will be primarily addressing points raised in the paper titled Dream Investigation Results, produced by the Minecraft speedrunning team, as well as Geosquare's companion YouTube video, Did Dream Fake His Speedruns? Official Moderator Analysis. Let me briefly explain what the defense strategy will and will not include. For the details and nuances of the prosecution's case, you should consult their document and video directly. However, conceptually, you can think of the case like this. They present a statistical analysis in which they argue that Dream was unusually lucky during 6 Minecraft speedruns live streamed in October of 2020. The fancy math and its accompanying presentation may be termed the moderator's evidence. On the basis of this evidence, and considering the moderator's decision regarding Dream's submissions, as well as the previously mentioned document and the video, 2 conclusions are urged. Firstly, the speedrun moderators reject Dream's speedrun attempts and conclude that they are not acceptable entries for the official leaderboards. Secondly, they conclude that Dream's game was modified. Taken together, these 2 conclusions have been understood to entail the proposition that Dream cheated during his speedruns. We will refer to this as the moderator's interpretation. To summarize, on the one hand you have the moderator's evidence, and on the other hand you have the moderator's interpretation of their evidence. There are 4 postures that a rational person could take with respect to these 2 things. Number 1, you could accept both the evidence and the interpretation. This seems to be the prevailing opinion, but it is not a recognizable or sustained defense. Number 2, you could accept neither the evidence nor the interpretation. One way to reject the moderator's conclusions would be to attack their evidence. For example, perhaps they performed certain calculations incorrectly, or they relied upon corrupted or incomplete observational data. Technically, number 3, it is also possible to accept the interpretation that Dream cheated, but not the moderator's specific evidence. Maybe you have other evidence, we do not. Number 4, our main defensive strategy will be to accept the evidence, although we assess its weight independently from and differently than the moderators, but not the interpretation laid upon the evidence by the moderators. Even if the fancy math is correct, it still doesn't necessarily follow that Dream cheated. In other words, we'll show that the moderator's evidence and the moderator's interpretation come apart. We'll attempt this by presenting considerations of 2 sorts, philosophical and psychological. Firstly, it's important to note that mathematical models and theories do not wear their interpretations on their sleeves. At one point in his video, after acknowledging that real-world data is always biased, Geosquare states, the field of statistics was made to interpret this stuff, nonetheless, but he is using the word interpret differently. Statistics is the science of collecting and analyzing numerical data. Statistics allows a person to perform mathematical operations on particular numbers in order to arrive at different numbers for presentation or other theoretical purposes. If you want to call these mathematical manipulations interpretations instead of analyses, you're free to do so. But what we mean by interpretation is the use of English words to express the real-world application or significance of some numbers or some mathematical analysis. It is often very difficult to say just how some complex math applies to the real world. Many suggested interpretations are tendentious. That is, they can either be agenda-driven or heavily dependent upon controversial assumptions. An illustration of this is quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is a description of subatomic particles in terms of probability functions. In simple terms, it's just math. And in this pure mathematical form, it's strongly confirmed. In fact, it's arguably the most empirically successful theory in the history of physics. Even though scientists agree about the math, thinkers disagree about what the math implies for the real world. This has led to endless speculation. At present, there are numerous suggested interpretations of quantum mechanics. The math underdetermines the interpretation. This just means that, even if your math is perfect, it may not be at all obvious what the math means in real-life terms. So, it's not enough to just dazzle us with probabilities and graphs. We want to know what the math means. The probabilities and graphs may show that the moderators are sharp at math, but we don't just want good number crunchers, we want good interpreters. How good are the moderators at interpreting? Although we do not pretend to have a definitive answer to this question, a few things suggest that they're not as sophisticated as we might desire. One quick indicator is GeoSquare's Bush League use of the phrase begs the question. After summarizing the moderator's evidence and interpretation, GeoSquare asks, this begs the question. Since it looks like Dream might have cheated, how could he do it? A sophisticated analyst would surely know that, in philosophy, the phrase beg the question refers to an informal logical fallacy in which the reasoner, in a circular and illicit manner, assumes the truth of a proposition without properly arguing for it. Philosophy-oriented and English grammar websites nearly universally report GeoSquare's use as erroneous. But since his use of the phrase, which basically means raises the question, is widespread among unsophisticated speakers, we'll assume he was simply accommodating his audience. More serious philosophical concerns are close at hand. For example, GeoSquare approvingly quotes Karl Jobst to the effect that, if anything, having a better understanding of a game makes you more likely to cheat. This principle is not simply counterintuitive, but it is arguably false. One way to see this is by way of the distinction between necessary and sufficient conditions. Having a basic awareness of a game and its rules is necessary for doing anything with the game. For example, you can't cheat at the African game of Aware if you don't even know that there is such a game, or if you have no idea how to play it. Therefore, a basic knowledge of Minecraft is a precondition for cheating at Minecraft. But that having this low-level knowledge is necessary for someone being a cheat, or, for that matter, for someone being a player, does not mean that knowledge is sufficient to make someone a cheat, or that advancing in knowledge raises the probability of a person's becoming a cheater. If Job's stated dictum were a true principle, the ramifications would be absurd. For instance, it would mean that the odds that a minor league player cheats at baseball would go up as soon as he gets to the major leagues. Or, to use an illustration from chess, the principle would mean that in a match between a chess novice, like me, and a chess master, like Jeremy Silman, you should bet that Silman is the more likely to cheat. This seems preposterous. Plausibly, what Karl Jobst should have said instead is the converse. It's not, probably, if you're knowledgeable then you're a cheater, it's probably, if you're a cheater then you're knowledgeable. Jobst is bumping up against a plausible principle, he just stated it backwards. This error matters for two reasons. Firstly, if it were true that gaining knowledge in an area made a person more likely to engage in dishonest behavior in that area, then the same could be said about the Minecraft moderators themselves. Consider, they are knowledgeable both about Minecraft and about statistical calculations. If this knowledge made them more likely to cheat, then we should probably reject their analysis. Secondly, the same sort of mistake, stating a true principle backwards, arguably surfaces in the recurring discussion about Minecraft and luck. Early in the video, GeoSquare, alluding to comments made by Dream, remarks about how lucky the standards for world records have gotten. Later, in performing their statistical comparisons, the moderators found that Illumina, with his 20 Pearl Barters out of 323 Piglin trades, was the luckiest runner we could find. But once again, the moderators have seemingly confused a proposition with its converse. For all lucky people are ranking speedrunners is clearly false, while all ranking speedrunners are lucky people is arguably true. A further interpretive point could be made about GeoSquare's unclear use of the word feasible. Just because something is possible doesn't mean that it's at all feasible. Unless we think that feasibility is a synonym for chance of cheating, it's tempting to think that GeoSquare meant to use the word probable. But you might think none of these points affect the statistical analysis itself. To this question, we want to know how confident should we be that the moderator's math is a good model of the situation. Here, it's worth thinking about the saying, statistics don't lie, but statisticians sometimes lie. Sometimes is not a lie in the sense that the information is utterly false. It may just be exaggerated. This may or may not be intentional. For example, if you say, "Don't worry about this test, doctors only need to draw 1 milliliter of blood," it doesn't seem like very much. On the other hand, if you say, "Don't you know that they'll be taking 4 billion red blood cells out of your body?" then it makes things sound a lot worse. But 1 milliliter of blood and 4 billion red blood cells are equivalent. It's just that one sounds really scary and the other doesn't. So why does this matter? Well, let me model Dream's Peglin bartering luck for you a different way. Dream got 42 Ender Pearls from 262 barters. What's the expected number of pearl acquisitions for 262 barters? The moderators give the probability as 20 out of 423, which is approximately 4.73%. Therefore, out of 1,000 bartering attempts, we'd expect to get about 47 pearls. For 262 barters, we'd expect about 12 pearls. Dream's 42 is approximately 3.4 times greater than the expected value. But saying 3.4 times bigger doesn't sound nearly as scary or as wildly improbable as saying that his odds were 1 in 177 billion. Now, the moderators would probably want to say that they didn't pick their way because of the psychological impact, but because it's a better way to model the situation. I have no idea, but we do know that sometimes models can fail to map onto the real world. At one point, in advance of the landfall of Hurricane Andrew, which devastated what is now the Miami-Dade area in August of 1992, none of the models used by the National Hurricane Center even predicted that the hurricane would move towards southern Florida at all, let alone be the most destructive to ever hit that area. And the National Hurricane Center was staffed and run by all the hurricane prediction experts working for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's National Weather Service. Again, we don't have any idea how accurate the moderators' models are, but it's worth observing a few of their own caveats. Number 1, the moderators admit that their modeling technique assumed that barters and rod drops within sequences of streams are binomially distributed, which is not precisely true. Number 2, the moderators actually used a calculation method called chi-squared. It turns out that this method doesn't give the exact binomial distribution, it only gives an approximation. Number 3, the moderators further disclaim exactitude by stating, "We aim to calculate not the exact probability that this streak of luck occurred if Dream is innocent, but an upper bound." Finally, number 4, they come right out and say they're certain that their resultant value is incorrect. And this is just what the moderators disclose. A quick series of searches of some of the relevant statistical literature reveals that for rare events, approximate distributions and bona fide binomial distributions can come apart widely. Judgments based on these approximations, then, can yield unreliable estimates of the significance of the binomial distribution for rare events where the probability of success is small. To summarize, the moderators confess to estimating the probability by using inexact calculations and approximating a binomial distribution, all the while simultaneously admitting that even an exact binomial distribution would not be a precisely true way of modeling barters and rod drops. In the end, their conclusion, which we'll recall was that Dream's game was modified in order to manipulate the drop rates, rests at best on their fancy math being a good approximation. This is pretty poor grounds for besmirching someone's character. And there's one more thing. To accept the moderator's interpretation as conclusive, we'd have to believe that high improbability is an indefeasible reason for concluding deception or dishonesty. This is not at all obvious. If high improbability were a definitive objection, then we should never believe anyone who claims to possess a winning lottery ticket. The odds are just too big, they're probably lying. Finally, we do have to keep in mind that evidence for an acceptable speedrun is different from evidence of cheating. The moderators could have a rule that disqualifies any speedrun submitted on a Tuesday. It's their prerogative to reject submissions, just like employers can fire at-will employees. They can be fired for a good reason, a bad reason, or no reason at all. Would-be speedrunners take note. So, if the moderators want to take their alleged good approximation as reason enough to reject Dream's speedrun, they may feel free to do so. But we fail to see any compelling reasons why this manifest approximation should be considered sufficient evidence of cheating. The math isn't enough, whether it's correct or not.